Hello, and welcome to the Living Well Show, the program that strives to empower adults to live life on their own terms. I am your host, Nicolette Hume, the Community Engagement Coordinator for the City of Lake Oswego Community Center. Today, our show, we will be talking about women and sexuality. In our youth-obsessed culture, where we see women as having a shelf life in terms of their beauty and value, it can make it very difficult for many women to talk about their sexuality in terms of their attitudes and beliefs, desires, and even past trauma. I would like to introduce today Jackie Shannon Hollis, a writer and speaker and the author of the memoir, This Particular Happiness, a Childless Love Story. She has a master's degree in social work and a background in counseling, and you can also read many more of her essays online as well. Today, Jackie and I will be discussing aging and sexuality, body image, sexual intimacy, vulnerability, and sexual trauma. Welcome back to the show, Jackie. How are you?
I'm great, Nicolette. Thanks for having me back. I'm excited about this conversation.
Thank you. I'm excited to have it as well. It's been long overdue, I think, for many. And I love the fact that we're also bringing an intergenerational dynamic to it as well. And
Yes.
so, before we begin, can you please share with us your background and what inspired you to be a voice for women and sharing their truth?
As I think about it, there's so many parts to it. I've always been someone who is a bit more open than sometimes does me good. um, and I've always felt that there's this whole part of our lives around sexuality that we don't talk about, and that we've been told to sort of, it's private, keep it secret, don't speak about it. And yet it's such a huge part of our lives. And so that it's an area that I would like to see people feel more comfortable engaging in conversation. And it's one of the reasons why I'm excited about talking with you today, Nicolette, is because I think it's an opportunity to see that kind of conversation happening. And so that's really a lot of kind of what this is about today.
Well, I have to say, I am probably an old soul, and I certainly admire women who share their wisdom. I am a glutton for wisdom, and especially from women who've unfortunately have had to experience some of the hard knocks in life to attain that wisdom, but at the same time, um, it does not fall short on me. But in terms of aging and sexuality, though, I think, we've talked about the youth obsessed culture, and we kind of see as women having that vitality only in their 20s and 30s. And then after that, it's like, well, as you get closer to menopause, then you just kind of die,
Mhm. Yeah.
is what they make it seem like. Although, contrary to that, when you have the CDC reporting, higher rates of STDs in individuals, I think it's 65 and older, there is some dynamics still going on there, despite what we believe or for some individuals want to believe. So, with that being said, let's talk a little bit more about, the aspect of aging and sexuality. It seems like
Mhm.
it's more of a myth that it's dead with youth. Is
Uh-huh.
that true?
Yes.
I mean, I don't think it's true.
I don't think it's true either, but I think it's a mixed bag. I think I have a number of women friends, and we're sort of all over the map. I have several friends who are no longer having a sexual life. It's not something, either because of them or their partner. It just isn't happening, or they're not partnered and not seeing anyone. And so and for them, they're okay with that. But I think the big secret is that there are a lot of people, women that are still very, very sexually active. In fact, big surprise, more so now than they were as when they were younger. And because of this and what you call like the shelf life of our sexual vitality, the idea that it reaches an end, it's like, well, what exactly is that end point? Is it, like where is that cutoff? There isn't one, and I think we're all unique in that way. But I think the story that we should not be sexual as we get older can impact our feelings about still being sexually active and interested and having desire, and what to do with that desire when your body is changing. And from the external view of the world, that's considered not desirable, but inside we still experience desire. So I think one of the things that I'm really have been paying a lot of attention to are the stories that we have about being old and how we talk about aging. I listen to my friends speak about, about aging, and whether we're speaking about it with delight and joy, or with this fear and trepidation, which of course we have that because that's what we're taught to have.
Yeah. Well, and then also too, in terms of um, the aspect of desire, there's in my line of work working with a lot of older adults, I see women who are like, well, I would like to have companionship without sex. Or then there's
Mm-hmm.
the opposite where it's like, I don't want to be put out to pasture. I
Mm-hmm.
still want, the full enchilada.
Uh-huh.
So, what would you say, for women who are feeling that way? What would, I don't know, how do you kind of mitigate that? Because it can, especially when they are single and dating, it can feel like, how do you ask or put out, what you are wanting or desiring?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, and I think particularly for my generation and older, sometimes we have been taught. I mean, I think this would be a question I'll be curious to come circle back around to with you, but I'm 63, and there was a sense of always focusing on the other and not on my own desires. And so learning how to say what I want. And if I think about dating, I'm married, so that's not on the table for me. But when I think about, if going into that world of dating, that some of it is learning from what I think the younger generations seem to be doing, which is being much more clear about, this is what I want, this is what I'm looking for, and having, I don't know if you hear the term sex positivity, but it's about really sort of embracing our sexuality. And if we're someone who wants to be very active sexually, that's okay. But also, if we're someone who doesn't want to be active sexually, then that's okay. And we find there are matches on both sides of that. There are companions that want to just be non-sexual companions. They want to have the physical contact, but no more than that. And there are other people who meet the bill of, I want to go out and be sexually active, but I'm not looking for a commitment. And these days, there's way more of that. I think, particularly younger generation, but I think that the older generation is starting to explore that. And I think that there are, some of the technology that's available, the dating sites allow for that clarity. This is what I'm looking for.
Well, and you bring us to another aspect of this is our social attitudes on that. So, an older generation, it has been, women shouldn't be talking about those things. They will be viewed as promiscuous, and therefore you have some kind of scarlet letter, if you will, in that regards. Whereas In my generation, we grew up with Sex in the City and this attitude that, if the guys are doing it as women, we can do that too. And so there's a real difference in that, even though with the baby boomers, they did grow up during, the 60s and the sexual revolution, there is still that, I think with women, almost like this good girl, bad girl complex there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whereas with my generation, it's kind of do what you want.
Right. Uh-huh.
um, and, or I guess the phrase would be, do you, you
Uh-huh.
do you,
You,
when it
uh-huh.
comes to that.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
what do you think about that, with your generation and how to explore that? Because it doesn't even matter if it's still, if a person is single, like let's say someone who is out in the world dating and they're over, 60 years old, it's still, there is still that element to that. Or even if they are in a relationship and maybe, like you were saying, they have a harder time sharing what their needs and desires are for this time in their life together with a
Yeah.
person.
Well, two things. When I think about my own story, my own experience, sexually, I used to say that I was promiscuous when I was a teenager. My therapist continued to correct me on that when I was seeing her, and she said, "You were sexually active," because promiscuous is such a it's a got a negative tone to it. So. So I was very, very sexually active, and there was clearly a double standard. What I was doing was not considered okay. And yet the boys that I was having sex with, it was considered okay. In fact, a score for them to be having sex at a young age. And so I carried a lot of shame about that for a number of years. It was a secret, and it was
Mm.
something. Well, it wasn't entirely a secret because the other boys knew, and the word was out in the school about me, and that was for me a time of really not understanding why was it okay over there and not here, and so there's that piece of it, and I think that my generation can still hold those kinds of stories. And so for me, it really is quite a delight to see the younger generation having a different experience with that. But I want to kind of come back to you and ask you, do you think it is different for your generation for how women are a different level of judgment or not?
That's a really good question. I would say that I don't entirely know because even
Hmm.
as my generation, we're called the geriatric millennial. Um, that it's a real term. I read it on Business Insider. Um, but aside from that, even then, the internet was not what it is today. So I look at my generation and maybe that of those who are in high school right now, and it's just a completely different world and what they're able to put out there. And we didn't really have accessibility to that at that, you know, adolescent or even early 20s. But I don't know if it's entirely changed because for my generation, yes and no, yes and no, and I certainly can't be the authority for my for
Yeah.
my generation on that, but certainly I will say that it's in the back of my mind. But I also grew up in a very staunch Catholic family, so you have that level of complex with it, which is just a whole nother topic.
Yeah.
um,
Mhm.
but for someone who didn't grow up that way, maybe they feel more liberated in that sense. Whereas
Yeah.
I didn't get to, you know, fully embrace that or see that just because of this religious context with it. And
Yeah.
again, religion is not as big of a deal today as it was even 20 or 30 years ago. So again, that also changes the dynamics with that as well.
Yeah. I think some of what you're getting at is how, we each have, there are some very unique experiences, and then there are these sort of common experiences. And I think around our sexuality, the biggest challenge in it, in some ways, is how hard it is to talk about it, how hard it is to talk about what we're doing or not doing, what we want. There, for women who are not having sex, they experience shame often about that, about their lack of desire. For people who are very sexually active, they are sort of like, I'd like to talk more about this, but no one wants to talk with me about it, or they're seen as bragging, or not telling the truth about it, and because they're having a really pleasurable sexual experience. So it's really confusing to talk about it. And people, I think, tend to get uncomfortable because they're all having somewhat different experiences. And but I want to circle back to talking about desire and how we speak about what we want or what we like, or how we even know what we like. I think one of the things that goes on for women is this sense that because there has often been a tendency to be, and particularly women of my generation and older, a tendency to be externally focused on the needs of the other, that we don't really learn how to focus on our own bodies and what our bodies respond to or don't respond to, and then how to speak about that. So that's one of the things I think that in my own personal journey has been really valuable, because I was so focused on the other. And then I ended up with a man, after a number of relationships. I ended up with my husband, Bill. And one of the things he said to me early on in our sexual relationship was, "You're responsible for your orgasms." And I was like, what does that mean? And basically, he was saying, because I think there's a thing often with men about, was that good? Did you come? Did you have a great experience here? And so there's this pressure. And he's like, I'm not. I feel like it's more about you telling me what you want and need, but I'm not going to be worrying about all of that. I'm also here to have my own experience, and we can have that together. But you have to tell me what you want.
Wow. He is a very evolved, man in that regards. Because I think that we always talk about, performing and all of that stuff, but I don't really think that's even fair to men to put that all on them, that it's
Right?
their job, So I do think that he shared with you something very, very valid. And
Yeah.
even too about, women and their bodies, and then entering into this place of sexual intimacy, it can feel very, when we're talking a little bit about body image, there is also a generational aspect to that as well. A certain era may have found a certain body type to be desirable. I would say these days there is way more openness about, or there seems to be more acceptance about all types of bodies. And so I do see some older women that I've worked with really kind of struggle with that. Or, as our bodies age, there's different things that come with that for both men and women, or just, you could have a surgery and it's change things. Various types of surgeries can change how your body looks, maybe even taking away those identifiers that we would, especially with breast cancer and things like that. But all of these different things. And I think that kind of again, going back to the communication, between these individuals and really sharing what their needs and wants and desires are is important. What would you like to add in regards to that?
Well, I do think it's such an incredibly exciting time about how our narrow view of what is considered beautiful or desirable is changing. And I mean, it's just incredible. And I am hoping that we just continue to move that forward into the aging body, and that women of my generation, and I see women 45 and on just going through this real trauma inside themselves about the changes that are beginning to happen in their body. And I'm thinking, oh, you better wait, because there's going to continue to be more. And the only thing you can do, I think, is to embrace it and to love it as this is the body that is your gift. It's going to carry you through for many more years, and you cannot shame it. You have to love it and enjoy it, acknowledging that it's going to probably have more pain and discomfort and limitations and scars. So I think there's that piece of it, that we, in my generation, I think, can really take the lead from the younger generation, what they're showing us about that level of acceptance, and begin to ask the questions of ourselves. Why am I judging this? What is it that I've learned from the outside that's told me that this wrinkle or this thing on my neck or whatever is not okay, when it's simply a function of being alive? Or this scar, if someone has gone through a mastectomy, or all of the various things that can happen to our bodies. It's about continuing to challenge, where is that judgment coming from, because that's someone else's voice. That's not what should be inside ourselves about our own bodies.
Hmm. And also, too, intimacy, and our what we desire within our relationships can be of something. I remember there was this older couple I knew, and they said they had the most intimate relationship ever. And these researchers are like, what do you guys do? Because I mean, they were very advanced in age, and they're like, we hold hands all the time. And
Oh,
that to them was very intimate,
yeah.
and it doesn't have to be, as I say, the full enchilada. There can be so many other ways to enjoy each other and even our bodies, at various stages. And even the hormones, our hormones change. And as women, we have all these hormones that
Hmm.
function for a reason and then kind of take a turn, after once we hit menopause, things do change, but it's for a reason. And I feel like I wish there was more women out there, and I do see them coming, um, with more empowerment and positivity about, reaching that turning point and embracing it, not seeing it as a type of death sentence or, oh, I'm getting old, but rather, I am lucky to be in this space, and is it my body interesting that it's
Hmm.
changing in these ways, and approaching it with more curiosity as opposed to, well, I looked in the mirror and what the heck happened?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be like that. I don't
Hmm.
want it to be like that for
Right.
myself.
Hmm. Yeah. The thing that happened for me, as I got older, was, well, one is, there were times. So let me just back up a little bit. So I was very active sexually as a young person, as a teenager in my early college years. And but what would happen is that when I got in a relationship with someone for any length of time, my sexual desire left. And then I would think, well, this means I'm not in love, and I would go search for the next person. Eventually, it occurred to me this didn't have to do with that person out there, but it had to do with me. and my own process sexually. There's another piece of it that maybe we'll get into here in a little bit. But when I met my husband, it was clear I really wanted to be with him. And when I felt that desire begin to change from the initial falling in love and excitement, I wanted to stay, and I wanted to stay engaged sexually. But some of what happens is that when we really get to know someone emotionally, that there's this kind of vulnerability that can happen sexually where we are seen. It's not just engaging in something with our bodies, we're engaging with our hearts as well, and sort of really allowing ourselves to be seen. And if you think about what sex is, that it's, I mean, we're close to someone on every sensory level, touch, smell, hearing, seeing, taste, all of those things are really engaged. Feeling, all of the sensation emotionally, as well as, just the, on our bodies. So all of that's engaged. Talk about vulnerable. And that what the ideal, the most satisfying sex comes from really letting go, letting us experience those things on a really deep level, letting sound be present, letting the sensations really sink in. One of the things that happened for me is that I found myself often in those intimate moments feeling very uncomfortable with certain kinds of touch. Because it felt like almost like it hurt. I was so sensitive, and I confused pain for pleasure for pain, or pain for pleasure, that I didn't really understand. That was just my body reacting, and how to be present with that and feel safe in that was a challenge. But part of the process was staying engaged, staying and speaking to my husband about what was happening for me, and him being present with me in that as well.
So, for people who, you're sharing this information right now and they're like, yes, I certainly have felt that way. Like when you're talking about you being in a relationship for a certain amount of time, and this person, that type of connection has changed in that regards. What would you say that people could do to understand that more?
I think one of the key things is knowing that this is a natural transition in a relationship, that you go from this rush of falling in love and the romance and the excitement of that to I know you and you're familiar. And in that familiarity, you've begun to see my flaws, and I've begun to see yours. And there's this struggle for power in a way, and us maintaining a sense of yourself in that. And so sexually, when plus you're maybe beginning to build a life together, or children come into the picture, or a home and jobs and all these things. So it's really can be a challenge to stay engaged sexually. And then also, if you're having a deep level of intimacy in the kinds of conversations you're having and the other ways that you're engaging, sex may seem less important. But I think that, at least for me, it was really important to just keep staying engaged, even at times where it was challenging. And I know that there were times where either my husband or I, may have felt like, why do we even try? Because we end up in a power struggle in bed and alongside everywhere else. But we kept staying with it and talking to each other and acknowledging this is a challenging time, but we also want our sexual life, to be part of our intimacy. So the main thing I would say is to keep staying in and to keep trying to talk about it, even though it can be hard and uncomfortable to do that.
Do you have some tips for people staying engaged in that regards?
Yes. I think one of them is if things have become really, like we're just really at a stalemate here, don't keep digging that rut in deeper by trying to do the same thing. Maybe just take time together to do like that older couple that you were talking about, holding hands and being together physically, touching each other without any expectation of that leading to sex. How do we simply be together and be present with each other? Let's lay down together, let's hold each other, and not have it necessarily be about resulting in it going any further than let's just feel each other here together. I think also for, and this is particularly, I think for, in my view, more women than men, is being able to explore your own body and know what it is you like and don't like. There are times, I think that comes with, you can do that alone, but you can also do that with your person there. And so if your partner is willing to engage, to just be, Bill and I have done this where it'll be one or the other of us, but the other person touches us and we let them know what we're responding to and what we're not. I really like that. That feels really good. Or maybe over here. And it's not necessarily touching just your genitals. It's just like, I really like it when you touch the inside of my arm. Or I really like to have my eyes caressed, whatever it is, touched lightly. It's just really allowing yourself to be known in these very small ways. And that is also very, very vulnerable.
Yes, and that leads me to ask you more about, exploring vulnerability in relationships, because I think it's easy, obviously, in the beginning of a relationship where things are all new and it seems like you are sharing, your soul and what have you. But after that phase is over, then the true aspect of being intentional and being intentional about your vulnerability really comes to light, or comes to light with the fact that you may not be as vulnerable as you thought you were. So can you talk a little bit more about the power of vulnerability in, let's say, a long-term relationship, and then also in terms of sexual intimacy?
Well, when I think about vulnerability, I think about it, the word intimacy also is right alongside it. And intimacy, one way I like to think about it is into me, you see. So vulnerability is about letting ourselves be seen, even the messy parts of ourselves. And that we tend to think often of conflict as problematic because we don't want to fight. But conflict often comes from a challenge with being vulnerable, that we don't know how to step forward with. This is what's going on for me right now. I'm feeling overwhelmed, or I'm feeling scared, or I'm feeling sad. We have a hard time even identifying that in ourselves, so we just react to a situation. So vulnerability really is about sharing, slowing down and saying, this is what's going on for me in this moment. Oh, like here would be a moment. I've lost my train of thought, Nicolette. Can I need to think this through a moment, because I know that you're waiting for me to respond and I've gone blank. That is a moment of vulnerability. To take those times, I'm feeling really scared about what you said, and I don't know how to respond. Can you just give me a moment? There are all these ways that we can do that in a given moment, that will help make the other person safe if they see you're struggling. And when it comes to sexual intimacy, it's sort of the same thing. I think saying, you know what, this is going too fast for me right now, or I'm not responding and I'm not quite sure why. Or I want something more from you that I'm not getting and I don't even know how to articulate what it is. Can you just sit with me while I sort this through and just let me kind of dump it out and see if, I come to what it is that I need to know to help you be close to me.
Well, and one time you had shared this from one of our previous shows. There was a time where you and your husband were together intimately, and in that, you had talked about you knew, you're at a point in your relationship where you know so many things about this person, and in that moment, you wanted to, it was like I could say something to hurt you so badly
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason. I don't know if you're trying to sabotage the moment or to keep him at bay because maybe you felt too vulnerable. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's a very real situation,
Yes.
and then
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
in terms of intimacy.
Yeah. Well, Bill and I had this dance that we had done for many, many years where he would be feeling really, really close to me, whether it was sexually close to me or we were just, he was just having what we call a love bubble. And I loved that. I thought I loved that when he felt that way. But often in those moments, I would say something to him that he would experience as hurtful. It might be a sharp tone, or it might be me asking a question about something that had happened in the past. And I was always, he would react to it and say, "Why would you bring that up now?" And I was always like, it just popped into my head. I don't know why. And so we went through this for a long time, and it caused a great deal of strife for us. He would go distant. I would come after him. I thought that he was too sensitive. And finally, there was a certain point where it had really risen up for us both. And he had distanced himself quite a lot, and he'd gradually come back closer. And we were at having sex at a certain point, and he was being so open and so loving with me, expressive of his love toward me. And I had just this very powerful feeling of a flash of anger, and this thought of something cutting came into my head that I almost said. And I realized, oh, this is because I'm scared. I'm scared of his love right now. I'm scared of having him feel this close to me. I'm scared that I might get overwhelmed by it. And this is what has happened over all these years. So I told him that that's how I was feeling. And it was a huge changing moment for us, for me to connect with the fear of intimacy and vulnerability, of the fear of being loved, which seems like, why would I be afraid of being loved? But I think that many people deal with that and aren't even aware of it. We think we want to be loved, but we are also very afraid that we're going to be swallowed up by that love.
Why do you think that? And I do think that there are a number of people who do feel that way. And
Mhm.
why do you think that is? That the one thing that they want the most in life, and then here it is, and it's like, I'm
Yeah,
scared
yeah.
of this.
Hmm.
Why would that
I
be?
think because I think there are a couple things. One is if, I grew up in a family where, I mean, certainly there was love in the family, no question about that. But my father drank, he was absent. My mom was sick a lot. And so I learned to be very, very self-sufficient. And that if I was a good kid, I would be left alone, and which I liked quite a lot. So often we have a family history that hasn't given us a lot of practice in being fully loved and knowing how to set boundaries within that love. That it's sort of like an all or nothing thing. So, so I think there's, that's part of it. And then the other part of it is this, well, it's sort of linked to that, but that this person is going to want more and more of me. That there's not going to be any space for myself in this. And so, and I think it may have to do also with, I could get hurt if I really allow myself to love back in this same way. It could be taken away. He could change his mind, or not, just all of the things. The other part of it, I think, has to do with I think one of the hardest things in a relationship is being reflected back, like seeing the reaction of that other person to you when you speak in a sharp tone or don't live up to what their expectations may have been. You're always being reflected back in a way that for me, I'm seeing myself through Bill's eyes at different times, and that can be hard because sometimes I'm not that great. I can be cranky or sharp toned or tired or distracted. And to see that in another's eyes can be a hard thing.
Well, and before we, as our show is kind of coming to a slight end here, but there is one area too that I really want to cover. And since we're talking about vulnerability, is women having a history of sexual trauma, whether that be in childhood or even later in life. And I know that you, Jackie, are a survivor of sexual assault. And could you share with our viewers a little bit about that, and then also how it's, at times has affected your, intimate life, because that, which is supposed to be seen as pleasurable, but yet that part has been, changed in women's view of it or what have you. How do they move forward from that?
Yes. Yes, when I was a college student, I was 20 years old, and a stranger broke into my apartment and raped me. I know that's always a hard thing to hear, was a terrible thing to experience. And what I mostly wanted after that was to just be okay and carry on. And so that's what I did. I didn't get any counseling, even though I later became a counselor. I just carried on in my life. Now, I had been very sexually active up to then, so it wasn't like this was my first sexual experience, which was part of what was confusing to me. What this event felt like it had more to do with was I thought that I might die, and the terror and the sense of safety being lost. What I didn't understand was how much that sense of safety, the loss of sense of safety, invaded my world in these sort of subtle ways. And one of those was sexually. And it took me, I would say, probably 30 years before I really understood how it had impacted me sexually. And it took being in a very safe relationship and in one where I continued to be in, have a full sexual life, so that I could really understand what that was. And what it had to do was shutting down parts of my pleasure response, that I, again, it goes back to a little bit of that sort of distancing myself, being a bit at an emotional remove sexually. And so while I enjoyed sex. It felt like a lot more work for me to enjoy it. And it took me quite some time to sort of come back into my body and to feel my body responding without having to protect myself. And that really took staying engaged and working at staying present with my body, with the sensations rather than what my head was doing. Because I think women especially can have a lot of mind chatter around sex versus staying where, what's that sensation? What does it feel like to be touched in that particular area? So I think a lot of women, I know that I am not alone because almost every time I tell my story, there are so many other women who have had some sort of sexual assault or childhood sexual abuse. And that we can't underestimate the effect that has on us sexually, but also I think we have to give ourselves a lot of grace to know that it takes some time to feel safe even exploring what the impact was and how to move past that.
What are some ideas or recommendations that you would have for women who maybe they are in a long-term relationship at this point and there are triggers for them, or maybe even just old memories coming up or what have you that they're trying to, where maybe it hasn't been a problem, but now it is. Like, what would you
Yes.
recommend that they do?
You know what, one of the things that happened for me, and it was just so shocking, would be, and it seemed like the more safe I got in my relationship with Bill and the more vulnerable and open I was sexually, that memories would come back. And it was like, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. How can that be? And it had to do with my own sort of letting go. And in that letting go, I think it just made space for some of these memories. The good news was that I was in a very safe relationship. So the things that I would say are to make your partner aware of that there is this history, in whatever way you feel safe sharing that. But it's important, your partner needs to know that that's going on, but also that you're not a little, Fabergé egg that they have to be careful with, but that it may come up in different ways, and that you want to be open to setting limits where you need to, but also to share, I had this memory come back. And I know it's really weird that this memory came back in this moment of intimacy between us, but I just want to either share it with your partner if that's someone you can share it with, or to really pursue therapy or have a trusted friend that you can talk to with it, about it with, because I think it's important to just simply be able to get it outside of yourself. And then I think, again, really the boundaries around touch and re-exploring what it is that you like, separate from moving those trauma memories away from your own body now, your own adult body now, all these years later.
Hmm. I've also heard them doing a lot of research with women and sexual trauma and meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when you talk about how there is kind of a disconnect with body, mind still
Mm-hmm.
going, but the body not feeling fully present within the body.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's been some positive results from that. So that's
Mm-hmm.
another
Yeah,
idea too.
right.
Um, but as our show comes to a close, what is some advice in terms of women and their sexuality and vulnerability? What would you like to leave as words of wisdom for our viewers?
Well, I think is to embrace the big secret that it's possible to be, still have a very full sex life, but to know that there may need to be adjustments. You may need to use more pillows or lubricants, or time the sex based on when, if you're with a male partner, when your male partner is able to be ready for it too. And to know that as your body ages, it's going to probably need some adjustments to maybe have a sore hip or your knee hurts or whatever, or it's the same with your partner. It's still knowing that you are, a rich, sort of vibrant human who gets to have that part of your life be full and rich and vibrant too.
Thank you so much for being on the show today, Jackie. It is always a delight. And the part I love the most is that you're just real and authentic and you're not filtered and you just put it out there. So, viewers, I hope you really enjoyed today's show.
Thank you, Nicolette. It's always fun being here and talking with you.
Thank you again. And as you've learned today from Jackie, there is certainly a lot for us to embrace. We should embrace the years that we get to have as we continue to grow and change and approach it with curiosity and wonder, as opposed to a death sentence. There's certainly much more to live for as we get older, and there's so much more to embrace as well. That's it for today. I am Nicolette Hume, and thank you for taking the time to be a part of our community today. Until next time, be safe, be well, and continue staying curious. Take care.